Hey everyone, welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show for May 15th. I'm Avram Pilch, your editor-in-chief. Over on the call with me, I've got Sharon.
Hello.
Our senior editor, Sharon Harding, and senior editor, Jared Walton.
Howdy.
And we're going to talk about some of the really interesting stuff that's been going on this week. Particularly around Nvidia and the GTC and the GTC virtual conference and keynote, and then we're going to talk about some really neat stuff that really interesting mouse that we've got, and some really interesting AI and robot stuff that's happening. So, Jared, you recently published an article called AMD versus Nvidia. Who makes the best GPUs, and care to tell the audience who haven't read it yet who won most of the rounds in this face off?
Sure. So, I mean, if we're going by sheer numbers, obviously the answer is Intel won. No. So, there's a lot of things you can look at. There's the core architecture. There's, extra features and technology, like NVIDIA's obviously got ray tracing with their RTX cards. Whereas, AMD's already moved to 7 nanometers on Navi as of July. So, there's some differences. But despite the 7 nanometer versus 12 nanometer advantage that AMD has, efficiency actually still goes to NVIDIA, which is that's a little concerning, but it also means that when AMD talks about a 50% performance per watt increase with RDNA 2, they could actually get there, because that would kind of be what we would expect relative to where I think NVIDIA will be once they release their 7 nanometer stuff. Anyway, performance, obviously at the high end, NVIDIA wins. There's nothing AMD has that can beat a 2080 Ti or a 2080 Super or a 2080 or even a 2070 Super. The RX 5700 XT is pretty close to the 2070. It's a little bit faster than a 2060 Super. So that's the mid-range cards, or the mainstream cards, is where AMD does have a price performance advantage. But at the high end, they just have nothing that really competes in the $700 market. So that's kind of where it stands. I don't think that's too surprising to anyone. The real question is what's going to happen once Big Navi and Ampere launch, which, we got our first glimpse as to what Ampere will actually have at the GTC thing this week. But it was a little bit of a it's the A100, which is going to be the replacement for the V100, which is going into data centers, and it will not be in an RTX 3080 Ti. It's just not designed for GeForce. So we'll see what happens later this year, but right now NVIDIA's definitely got the lead.
Wow. So, Sharon, what do you think about where Nvidia is and where they're going?
Yeah, I mean, as Jared said, AMD doesn't have anything really competing on the high end. And when you build a reputation like that, you're kind of the high-end graphics card vendor. So when someone goes shopping and they want to build or upgrade their computer to be the best, it's going to be hard to go for AMD when the general personas for both is NVIDIA has a good high end and AMD is for value and budget builds. That being said, I'm curious as to how many people are really focusing on that high end of graphics when it comes to the consumer market. And if that's really the, the big market to play in right now, since those cards are really, really expensive. And I'm not sure how much of the average users are really opting for those. Maybe Jared knows.
Well, it's tough to say. You can look at the Steam hardware survey, which there's obvious caveats with that, because we don't have all of the details behind how Steam conducts that survey, or Valve. I think there's another interesting point too, in that you look at laptops now. I did laptops for years over at On Tech before shifting to PC Gamer and now Tom's Hardware. But laptops, AMD now has a competitive CPU in laptops, but they've been getting killed in laptops for like a decade in terms of the graphics cards. Like it's legitimately hard to find a lot of brands with an AMD GPU as opposed to like there's tons of RTX laptops out there. There's a lot of GTX 16 series laptops, even 10 series stuff still floats around. So when you look at the laptop and the desktop market, it's definitely Team Green is in the lead. I think the numbers are potentially 80% to 20% in terms of market share. But again, that's like there's no one that gives a really clear absolute value that really says how much has been sold and how much is being used.
Yeah, I mean, it is a tough. I mean, obviously, Nvidia, controls the high end, but AMD still has some wonderful values. So we're not saying like don't buy AMD like
Right.
graphics cards. AMD
Yeah, like the
graphics
RX
cards.
5700 is still one of the best graphics card values out there. Like you can find them for close to $300, and like they're way faster than a 2060, which actually the 5600 XT is faster than a 2060 by a little bit. So 18% faster than a 5600 XT. The 5700 is a great card for $300 to $320. You don't get ray tracing, but at the same time, I'm like, I think when the Ampere stuff comes, there's a real good chance that second generation ray tracing is going to make the first generation ray tracing just kind of look like a joke. Like there's rumors floating around now that like the second generation RTX cards could be 4 times faster on ray tracing, which means like a 3060 might actually beat a 2080 Ti for ray tracing performance.
But adoption of ray tracing, aside from in Minecraft, has been kind of low. I mean, do you think we're going to see an uptick in games that actually take advantage of it? Because the promise was so great when it was first announced, but we haven't seen a lot of titles taking advantage of it.
Yeah, and I mean, like it's that chicken and egg scenario. Nvidia got there first, but the thing is, like we've got AMD is going to power both the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. They have ray tracing hardware. They've had the benefit of being able to see what happened with Nvidia and maybe potentially correct some things in their ray tracing implementation so that they're not as bogged down in performance. So we really don't know for sure what's going to happen with the consoles. But I mean, like the Unreal 5 tech demo this week, that was pretty amazing. They never said they used ray tracing, though. They said they had dynamic global illumination, which ray tracing, path tracing usually is a form of GI, right? But we don't know if they're just faking it in a good way, which it still looks good. Whether you're playing Red Dead Redemption 2 or any other number of games that have fake global illumination without ray tracing, like you can still make it look perfectly acceptable. So that's kind of the question: is how much will ray tracing kick up? The adoption kick up once we get these next generation consoles, plus second generation Nvidia hardware, plus AMD desktop hardware that will have ray tracing. Inevitably, it's going to be more use than we're seeing in the past year and a half. But I don't think it's going to be like this required feature probably for at least another 5 years, just because there's this huge install base of non-ray tracing hardware.
But my son still really wants the Minecraft RTX.
So I've got it, right? And my son, who loves Minecraft, he got on it and played with it. And then he got really upset because he had some texture packs that weren't ray tracing. And so he had created some worlds. And it was funny because one of them, he had like the plastic texture pack, and he had pictures hanging on the walls in this building that he'd made, his castle or whatever it was. And ray tracing basically broke all of those pictures. They're now blank textures, like you can't see them, but the object is there.
Oh, the dark
And he was
side
really
of ray
upset.
tracing.
He's so upset about it. He doesn't care that it looks nicer. He literally is like, Dad, can you get me out of the Minecraft beta because I want to have my pictures on the walls back.
Oh, yeah. My son would be very, very upset about that. I'm going to tell you right now, he would be very upset if anything he created in there went away. He would be devastated. So Sharon, you've been working on one of the most interesting mice that I've ever seen. I know, people might say, "Oh, mouse," but look, mice and keyboards and your screen are the things that you interact with the most on your computer. You can change your graphics card, you can get a new CPU, but you may not always notice the difference unless you're doing something that takes advantage of that performance. But I guarantee you, if I give you a new keyboard to spend all your day touching, or a new mouse to spend all your day rolling around, your life is going to change. So this mouse that we saw at CES, and it was really, really interesting. Tell us about it, and do you have it for show and tell?
Yes, I do. So it is from Asus. It's a ROG Chakram. Here it is right here. And it is $160. So there's a lot going on in this mouse, or at least you would hope. So as you can see, it lights up. Wow, yay, RGB, that's great. It's also Bluetooth and wireless, 2.4 gigahertz wireless. So you can do dongle or no dongle, or also play with it wired. But what's really, I guess you could say, innovative about this mouse is, let's see if you guys can see it. There's actually a joystick there for gaming with, and it actually comes with two different size joysticks in case the one isn't the right size for your hand. I've only had it for a couple of days now, but it's an interesting concept. It's obviously Asus here is trying to change what the typical mouse can do. So besides the joystick, there's a lot of other stuff going on. I didn't just break it. It opens up and there's the dongle storage. And then, let's see if we can get this going.
To the side.
There you go. So those are actually the Omron switches in there, and those you can take out with these included adorable little tweezers, and you can replace them with different switches that come with the mouse. And the reason you would do that is there's a different feel to the switches. One I'd say is a bit more stiffer and taller, so it requires just like a hint more force to actuate. And then there's the other one's a little shorter and feels a little snappier to me. So it's an interesting concept to be able to swap out the switches in your mouse and get the kind of feel that you want exactly. The other benefit to that is you kind of get two switches in the mouse, so that should theoretically extend the lifespan of it, because once those switches wear off, you can replace it. But to be honest,
sell new switches? Like, will they sell, like, there's two switch types right now. Will they have more down the road too?
Yeah, so it should be compatible with a number of switches from this brand. They don't have like a full list of the ones that are available quite yet. So you'd have to go to you can't buy it off of Asus. You'd have to go buy them separately right now. But I guess this is popular, that might change. But it's interesting, the ability to change how your mouse feels and keep the same mouse. It's an interesting concept. The one thing I would say though is, the two switches, while I can feel the difference, it's not a dramatic difference. So, and I even had two different switches in each button, and it's not that dramatic of a difference. I don't know how necessary it's going to be, but if you can have the best click, why not go for it?
Yeah, so somebody asked, when you say joystick, do you mean an analog stick?
Yes, this year. And it actually has an analog or a digital mode that you pick in the software. So I don't know if you could see, but it moves in all four directions. It doesn't go in though.
Yeah, that seems pretty cool. Can you use it? Can you use it to navigate?
Yeah, you can use it. Yeah, you can use it. You mean like outside of gaming, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't work in Bluetooth mode. It only works when you're using the dongle or if it's plugged in. But yeah, I was using it to scroll through my article earlier. It wasn't easier. It wasn't more fun, but I was doing it.
Well, so one thing that I think you did mention is there's 3 ways to connect, right?
Yeah. Bluetooth wired or through the dongle, the 2.4 gigahertz dongle.
Have you tested the 3? Like, which feels the best, or do they all feel the same?
I've had so far I've been working on Bluetooth because I'm trying to see how that battery life is. It's dropped a few times. The connection has dropped a few times and on various computers. I'd say since I haven't tried those other ways of connection yet. One thing I have been trying is, just using the mouse and these buttons that are removable. You can kind of feel they have a little bit more movement to them than a regular mouse would. So that's something I think some people might not go for, because it just feels a little bit more almost like cheap, sadly, since it's such an expensive mouse. But to make it removable, it has to have a little bit of give, and the plastic's pretty thin and nothing quite extraordinary. So we'll see how it fares long term.
How much does it cost?
It's $160.
So a lot for a mouse.
Yeah.
A lot for a mouse, but if you're using it every day, I mean, it's probably worth it. I mean, I'm a big advocate of people should put a good chunk of their other budget toward peripherals, because you're using them every day, and even when you upgrade your system, you may still be using them. So you may be using the same mouse for years. You may be using the same keyboard for years, the same monitor for years. Sad to say, the monitor I'm staring at right now, I've had longer than my son has been alive, and he's 8. But
a good monitor lasts a long time. Like, I got a 30-inch Dell back in the day. Actually, like, shout out to Dell. This is actually an old Dell T-shirt. I think it's from like their water cooled what was it called? The 7950 GX2, something like that. Ancient. Anyway, I had a Dell 30-inch for 10 years before I finally put it to pasture, and I still kind of miss it because it was a larger screen than my 27-inch, 28-inch, whatever I've got on 4K, but it was larger with a slightly lower resolution, so it was actually, to me, more readable and useful at a sitting distance than like the 4K 28-inch screens. But yeah, I mean, I've got a 28-inch G-Sync display that I've had for 6 years, and it's still doing great. So I'm firmly in that camp of like, spend a lot of money on a display once and keep it for 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to get new displays, but I'm kind of in a little bit of a bind. One, I have this monitor arm that I use that only supports 2 24-inch monitors, or one larger monitor, but I got to have at least 2 monitors. And so most things are not 24 anymore, particularly if I want to upgrade from what I have and have, like, I'd like 4K. Now I have, 1920 by 1200 on these. So
just upgrade your arm.
Yes. Well, right. It's a schmancy arm. That's the number one thing. And then the other thing, I probably haven't replaced these since I had kids, because I can't afford to replace things since I had kids. It's sort of like, do you get your diapers, or do I get a few more pixels? I guess you got to get your diapers. Anyway, somebody says their keyboard is 20 years old and their trackball is 21 years old. Holy cow! I can relate because I used to have a IBM Model M keyboard. That was my favorite. And I had a real IBM one, not one of the one of the new ones that use the same switch. And I spilled something on it a few years ago, and that was sad times. And then I replaced it with one from PCKeyboard.com, which has the same exact switches and had a Windows key, which is something that they didn't have when they stopped making IBM Model M keyboards in 1994 or 1995. And I was happy with that. But right now, my favorite keyboard and key switch, which I think we might have talked about in the last episode, is the Kale White switch. So that's what I'm using. So, but I don't know if it's gonna last 20 years, and maybe a better switch will come. Somebody
All
asked.
I know is my mouse. This is a Logitech. The left click is kind of screwed up, and this is only like 5 or 6 years old, so I can't see my mouse lasting anywhere near 20 years.
Yeah. Let's see. Somebody asks, regarding graphics, if I just rebuilt a computer with an RTX 2080 Super and it had an GTX 970 previously, would you suggest upgrading to the next NVIDIA gen or sticking with RTX 2080, I guess, for a while?
I mean, never upgrade until you feel like your system is too slow. Is like that's the sage advice, the wise thing. Whereas, if you're single or you don't have kids and you can afford it, yeah, go nuts. You
I
just got
mean,
your first real
I,
job. Buy the
I,
3080 Ti when it comes
I,
out.
I mean, I sincerely hope there are people in this world who can afford to upgrade every year or two, and that's wonderful. I wish I could. I think it really depends. I think it really depends on what can't you do now that you could do then. Now, listen, if I was independently wealthy, instead of buying like a mansion and a fancy car, I would upgrade my PC every like 6 months. I wouldn't even wait a year. Oh, great. It was there's one with slightly more cash, I'll get it. But yes, Logitech stuff lasts a long time, the TrackMan. I of course, as I think folks who know me know, have an affection for pointing sticks, which I'm probably one of only a handful of people who do. So I can totally understand why somebody would love their trackball because and be using an old one, because unfortunately you can still get trackballs, I think, but they're harder to come by than they were. So speaking of things that are not old but new, I wanted to be able to like do a screen share from this other system I have sitting over here. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and take my webcam and like turn it around for a second, so you'll see my messy office, but it's messy in a good way because you'll see there's a lot of boards. Anyway, so over here. Okay. Over here, what you see is this is the Nvidia Jetson Xavier NX board. I have one of the developer kits over here. Let's see if my wire stretches far enough that you can actually see it. There it is, plugged in along next to a pile of Raspberry Pis. Anyway, so it's running a demo over here. And what's interesting about this, and this is something that Nvidia just announced yesterday, they'd announced Xavier NX, their latest platform, back in 2019, although it's just starting to hit the market. This is the developer kit, and you need the developer kit if you want to try it at all, because the board itself is just the size of a SODIMM and has no ports on it or anything, so you can't develop with it unless you build your own board, which I guess you would do if you were designing your own line of robots. But if you want to get started, you're going to need the board. So for $399, you get the Xavier NX chip, which is pretty powerful. It's got 384 CUDA cores, a 6-core ARM processor. It runs a modified version of Ubuntu called Linux for Tegra. And the demo that you see here is that it's actually running 4 different artificial intelligence applications at once. In the upper left corner here, it has this thing that identifies people. So it's running a video. Now, to be fair, NVIDIA provided these demos, and they're videos that NVIDIA provided, so they're not real time. However, I have tested this with my webcam in real time. I've tested at least the pose one, and it worked. So there you can see it's detecting what's a person and what's not a person, or what is a person. Down here, you've got a pose detector, and it can detect sort of how people are moving by highlighting their joints. In the lower right corner, you have a gaze detector, and you can see it turns green here when the person is looking at the camera, but it stops being green when they're not looking at the camera. And the reason why that matters is if you were designing a robot and you wanted it to, say, be a hospitality robot, and you wanted it to talk to you when you came up to it in the middle of a store or a hotel or whatever, you want it to interact with you when you're looking at it, when it looks like what you want to talk to it. You don't want it doing like Alexa and Google Assistant do, where it just hears you say something like, "Hey, I found this on Google," and then it starts talking to you. So it can tell whether you really want to interact with it, and also, I guess, what mood you're in. by how you're facing. Are you facing a friend? Are you facing it? Are you an actual person? And are you looking at it? And then in the upper right corner here, the demo of this is you need sound. So you have to take my word for how it works. It's something called BERT, which is a natural language interpreter. And what it does is it can interpret, it can give you information based on a text file. So if I created a text file to test it called like History of Tom's Hardware, and I wrote Tom's Hardware was founded in 1996, and here are some of the editors. And then if you go and you ask it a question using a microphone and your voice, it will give you answers from that text. Now, the way they have this set up anyway is not super intuitive. It's not super intuitive. I should say the robot, the AI, does not have a lot of intuition, because if I wrote Tom's Hardware was founded in 1996, and then I asked it how many years old is Tom's Hardware, and instead of saying 24 years old, it just said 1996. So, if it were smart, it would have interpreted that, right? But that's probably how you program it. The point here is the hardware, and this is pretty powerful hardware that doesn't rely on the cloud, because it's running these 4 different applications at once, and you can get it for $399. Obviously, not worth getting if you're not planning to do professional NVIDIA Jetson development. If you are planning to do projects at home, Raspberry Pi is still a much better choice. And if you want AI in your Raspberry Pi, what is it? Goes to sleep very, very quickly.
I want to feed like that text parser thing, every article written on Tom's Hardware since the foundation, and then ask it some questions. That would be cool if that worked.
Yeah,
hey,
I don't
how
know
many
what the
cores
size
did the
limit is.
GTX 1080 have?
Right. So it's obviously not meant for, kind of doing one-off projects or hobbyist stuff. But what is interesting is it is compatible with some Raspberry Pi stuff. So if you see here, it might be hard to see, it has a GPIO, 40 GPIO pins, just like a Raspberry Pi. So NVIDIA tells me that you could actually put a Raspberry Pi hat on it and it would work. It also has 2 Raspberry Pi style camera ports. So you could take a Raspberry Pi camera module and plug it in. So you could use it with some Raspberry Pi stuff, and it definitely does work with Python for programming. But definitely, it's really made for people who want to make a commitment to NVIDIA's Jetson platform and use it professionally. And companies, there are many companies who are using Jetson, there was recently announced BMW using it and things like that. So there's a fair amount of interest in this platform, Jetson, because you don't require the cloud to use it. And yeah, it's a fun board and it's entertaining, but it doesn't have the level of support of, say, a Raspberry Pi, because it's really made for a handful. It's not like professionals are getting it. Now, NVIDIA also makes something called the Xavier Nano, which is $99 and runs the same operating system, albeit I don't think it could handle that demo. But I tried the Xavier Nano when it came out last year, and that one is priced at $99. So they were actually saying to me, NVIDIA was actually saying to me, "Oh, this could be a Raspberry Pi competitor." Well, honestly, it's very hard for anybody to make a Raspberry Pi competitor. But that board didn't even have Wi-Fi, and that's a no. This one does have Wi-Fi. It also has an NVMe slot, as well as the micro SD, which you use for storage. So it's definitely got a fair
slot
amount
on a little dev kit. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, and they actually, for the demo that they sent me, they actually said that they sent me an NVMe drive to put in it, because they said it works a lot faster to run the demos off of NVMe. So the boot drive is micro SD, but actually a lot of the data drive is NVMe. Somebody asks, can Jetson be applied for a TSA-like application such as detecting weapon printing in people's clothes? Probably. It does object identification. And I mean, to be fair, right, Jetson is a hardware platform, and they have the Jetson SDK, but there's a lot of models in it that it's using that are industry standards, like ResNet 50 and things like that. That are, don't worry if that's jargon to you. I have to admit, I don't totally understand all the AI models. I'd like to, and maybe I spend some more time with this board and learn more. But I think the principle of being able to identify objects from pictures is a solid one. That, yes, if it was trained properly, could identify a bulge that looks like a weapon. If there's not enough, I don't know, false positives from, I don't know, people carrying something else under their clothes.
What you basically do is you train it all on a big, supercomputer type application chip setup, and then Jetson is just a fast little inference platform is kind of their selling point for it, right?
I tried it out the prior generation when you had it last year, Eve. I mean, it identified me as a wig, and it's real. It's real. So I think it would need more training.
Yeah, that was another demo they had where you fed it a JPEG or something, and it would tell you what it thought it was. And it was actually kind of funny how poorly trained the model was, because it identified all kinds of weird stuff. But the machines are only as good as the programming of them, right? So it's powerful enough to probably to train the model, as Jared said, you probably use a more powerful computer. But to if you had a model, if you had the sort of the data that it's working off of, and you just wanted to do the identification for you, this probably could do that.
Should we end by talking about what you might use to train the model?
What might
the
you use
A100?
Yes. So talk about that.
So I briefly mentioned this earlier, but Nvidia announced their next generation compute platform GPU a couple days ago. It was the Nvidia A100, or the GA100 architecture. It's Ampere. It's the first actual implementation of Ampere. It's definitely for data centers. It has no RTX cores or RT cores, so it's not going to go into GeForce card anytime soon. It might be in like a Titan maybe, but I don't even think that's likely to happen. It's pretty much the follow-up to Volta V100, which was in the Titan V. But it's 7 nanometer, and it's huge. It's 826 millimeters square, which the maximum size chip you can make, like there's the little imaging thing that prints out, or that the lights shine through when you're doing the lithography, has a maximum size. And typically, I think that the hard limit is 856 millimeters square, something around there. Like you can't really go bigger than that. You have to make a second chip. So Nvidia is right at that limit with the GA100. 54 billion transistors. It's easily the largest GPU anyone has ever made. The previous record holder was probably the Volta V100, which was 21 billion. So it's basically 2.5 times the size. Performance is going to be conservatively 2.5 times faster for like the worst case scenarios. Best case scenarios, Nvidia is saying for like certain training algorithms, it will be up to 20 times faster than a Volta V100. So like it's going to be just a monster training and deep saying it wrong. Your deep learning neural networks. So like they have some stuff where they're like, yeah, you could replace a whole rack of 50 servers with one rack of GA100 servers and have basically the same performance with like 1/20th the power or something. I don't remember what their exact numbers was, but I mean, it's huge. The important thing to me is like not just, hey, it's got 128 SMs, of which 24 are disabled, or 20, something like that. And all that stuff. But like when you look at Nvidia made it 2.5 times as many transistors in basically the same space, they can do that relative to all of the current Turing architecture. So we could easily have, our next generation RTX 3080 Ti using probably a GA102 chip could easily be pushing twice as many transistors, which would be massive for performance. So like that's all exciting. Like I'm not going to be running a GA 100 in my house anytime soon, but the wider implications are really impressive. And we're definitely looking at the exascale supercomputer generation is coming online in the next year or two.
Wow. So if you had to count all of the transistors on your fingers, how long would it take you?
A long time.
Him do that.
The funny thing is, and Paul and I were talking about this a couple weeks ago, like when they say 54 billion transistors, it's an estimate. Like it's not just a rounding thing where they actually don't know how many transistors are really used because of the layout tools and all that they use. They just don't keep track of it. So it's around 54 billion transistors based on what they think, but it could be that like number could be off by as much as 10% is what I've heard.
Wow, crazy.
And that applies to like AMD and Nvidia and Intel. Like none of them actually have an exact true count of the number of transistors in modern chips.
Right. So I think everyone at Tom's Hardware's ambition is to be able to actually see what to be able to look at a chip and see if it's really 7 nanometers, and to count all the transistors.
I'll need better glasses.
Yes. So we'll get to the point of our show where we're going to talk, just to answer some of the audience questions before we end. Somebody asks, what is our opinion on Unreal Engine 5?
Like talking with Michelle.
Yeah,
I mean, like Michelle, she actually has a game designer's master's degree, which, that wasn't even a thing when I went to school. But she said, one of the huge things is what this is going to mean for content creators, like game developers who are like, hey, we've created this cool looking asset in whatever tool. Now we need to port it into game, but it's got 40 million triangles. And, how do we dumb that down to make it look nice and still run at acceptable performance levels? And with basically, as far as we can tell, they're using mesh shaders, which was something Nvidia introduced with the Turing architecture. It's part of the DirectX 12 Ultimate spec. It's also supported in Vulkan. So, PlayStation 5 is pretty much using Vulkan API as far as I understand things, whereas Xbox Series X will use DirectX 12 Ultimate. And so mesh shaders allows them to do tons of geometry, level of detail scaling on the fly very quickly. And so you don't even have to dumb down the models before you port them into the game. You probably would, because the space requirements for a 40 million triangle object compared to like 4 million triangles, it'd be 10 times as large. But running at full performance with billions of triangles potentially on screen without having to scale those down and do all your LOD mapping and pre-calculating, and yeah, it's going to be huge. I mean, and that's ray tracing too, allows you to do dynamic lighting really quickly and easily in theory. So like Unreal Engine 5 is certainly going to be used in a lot of games. I'm not sure if Unity or Unreal Engine 4 is more popular, but there are lots of games made with both. So I'm certainly excited to see what goes on with UE5 in the coming year or two.
Great. Well, it's been an exciting show. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. This wasn't our normal time. Some personal stuff came up, and so we rescheduled this week to Friday, but our goal is to be here at 3 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays every week. Thank you so much to our staff. I just want to say bye. For everyone. I'm Avram.
I'm Sharon.
I'm Jared.
See you next time.
Bye.